Welcome back, everybody, to the m2M cycling podcast on your mic. I'm joined today by Peter, who is a fellow weekend road warrior who's going to share with us all the juicy bits about how and why he got into cycling, the lessons he's learned and still learning, so that you, the listener or the watcher, can benefit from it. We've known each other for a couple of years. We've never actually had a chance to ride with one another. I kind of stalk you on Strava and vice versa. But it'd be great to understand and hear your story. What possessed you to kind of don the lycra and get into this world of road cycling?
Sure. Okay. So I think when I first started, as people may or may not be able to see, I'm not quite as slender as you yet, Ben. But yeah,
I've got a special effect on the camera. That's
right.
All it is.
Okay. A friend. So if I back up a bit, I moved out from London, moved to the countryside, wanted to get some exercise, started running, but when you're carrying weight, recipe for disaster, really. Bad knees and really could go about injuring yourself. So as it happened, a friend of mine who really, he gets quite a lot of KOMs on Strava. He's quite different to me. He's just a health freak, fitness, does literally diet. He does running as well, and you should check his stats.
He's boring.
On Strava. He's boring. He has no life. Yeah. He said, why don't you get into cycling? So I guess about 5 years ago, and it was on my radar anyway. No, it might have been more like 7 years, because I think I've had my road bike for around about 4. I just went out and did what people do and bought a Halfords bike. It was supposedly a hybrid, but I don't know if you can see it in the back. It weighs a ton. And I went from cycling the cycle routes to going on the road. So it was a natural switch for me after I got in. Have quite a stressful job. Getting out on the bike completely de-stresses you at times. I'm sure you get out there when you've had a terrible day at work and you just got to hit the tarmac. And so obviously I was doing 50 miles a week on this heavy bike, which wasn't ideal. And again, I would never have really thought to have gone out and bought a Halfords bike in the first instance, but then it just so happened I'd had a little look on the internet at Boardman bikes. It was the next logical step for me because it wasn't terribly expensive, and the idea was that I would then sort of maintain it myself and have a little project, because I was hoping to get into classic car restoration, but it's a bit more involved. Takes up a lot more time when you haven't got so much time on your hands. So that, in a nutshell, it was about health benefits, getting fit, and also having a hobby that you can get into, and you certainly can do.
So when you first got into cycling, I speak to many people, and they say, they go out on their first ride and they're all excited. They think they're going to be the next Froome. And then halfway in, they think, oh, shit, I'm not enjoying this. It's not as smooth as I thought. And it takes a few times before things start to click. Was it the same for you, or was it a steady falling in love with it?
I think the answer to that is I didn't have the same journey as maybe some people do, which is straight into road cycling. I had the so-called hybrid bike. I was going out and doing fairly gentle flat rides on, countryside road pathways, cycle routes, etc. And then after convincing my wife that it was financially viable to go to the next step up, I've not taken the next jump yet, which would be to get a bike along your lines. I got the road bike, and it was pretty much instant, because I'd gone from a very different type of cycling, and I built some fitness up, and then I went onto the road bike. It was I wouldn't say it was straight away on that day, but you would know yourself, riding a bike like that and then going onto a road bike doing the same thing is completely different.
And when you went from the old kind of mountain / hybrid riding to road cycling, did you go from normal pedals to clip-in pedals, or were you clipped in on the
Did
old bikes?
I
Okay,
did.
tell
In
us about
fact,
that. One of the biggest things I speak to people about when they're starting out is there's no way you're clipping me to a bike until they realize the benefits. How was it for you?
so yeah, I went full in. I did have the clips on the lowest setting, so they did slip out a bit easier. And you just focus on it. You're worried you're going to slip off or you're going to forget. And I won't deny it, there are times when you come up to a traffic light and you have a little wobble, and actually, little tell story, the only touch wood accident I had on my road bike was coming up to a pedestrian crossing where there was an elderly gentleman about to cross the road. I couldn't work out if he was going to cross or not, and I started going the wrong way, fell off the bike there and then. He then came over and helped me up when I was trying to help him out. So, yeah.
Whilst you're splayed on the floor like a lycra wearing beetle,
Yeah.
sort of stuck on its back.
Yeah.
What would you say was one of the biggest things or biggest lessons for you that when you were starting out in cycling helped you really kind of enjoy it more?
Okay. So I mentioned that I like tinkering with the bikes. I think, it's my, I'd much rather, there's an enjoyment that you get out of servicing your bike yourself, getting out on the road and it feeling 10 times better, and stop clicking and cracking, the bottom bracket or whatever it is. And interestingly, Ben, you're one of the people that helped me on this point, because
Oh, really?
the biggest thing that really makes a difference and really makes you enjoy it is knowing something about how to do this. I think even the other week you mentioned to me I was considering swapping out my rear cassette, and you said you might need a bigger derailleur. Things like that. I was actually in my previous garage, which didn't have light, heat or anything, and I didn't know that the pedals, you undo the opposite ways on each side.
Yes.
I ended up sticking a chain ring through my thumb as a result of that. So yeah, knowledge, little tips, and not just on the repairs on the bike either. Someone once taught me cadence was king. I was going the opposite way. Little things, little tips like that. Sharing the knowledge before you try and do it is absolutely priceless, and it really helps you benefit from your rides and from your maintenance as well.
That's a really interesting point, actually, which no one's really covered on, because not just the actual physical part of cycling, but I totally agree. I love just taking my bike and repairing it. And I don't know, I know it's a bit stereotypical, a guy in the shed with his tools and grease and mechanics, but there is something about it. I find it quite relaxing, quite cathartic. I've got another friend who can't stand it, but that's a really good point, actually. I hadn't thought about that.
Quite essential as well during lockdown. Don't forget when you couldn't get the only bike shop that you could find that didn't have a 2 or 3 month delay was a sort of Halfords, and they, I wouldn't necessarily write them off. There are good ones and bad ones, I would say.
When it comes to when you're on the bike and just keeping the fuel tank topped up, what are your go-to methods, products, food, drink?
Yeah, so I've started getting into bananas. Sounds a bit weird, but that's what I've started doing. Yeah, I've never eaten bananas in my life. Well, I've eaten them obviously, but I just had to. I heard they were very good for potassium, etc. And I've got this sort of gag reflex when I eat them, so it's not a pretty picture either. So I'd normally try and have a banana in the day before I go out for a ride. In terms of on the go, sports in science.
Yes.
I always get that the wrong way around. I don't know if I've got that the right way or not.
Science in sport. I think let's call it SIS. You can't lose.
Yeah. So the bars, normally one of those before I go out if it's a long ride. If it's just a sort of 15, 20, 25 mile, don't tend to have a bar, but and also the gels as well for longer rides, and also for electrolytes as well in the drinks.
Yes.
So yeah, I think SIS is definitely my go-to, even though I can't say it right.
No, and I'm sure that was all people find that very helpful. If I'm being completely honest, I kind of tuned out at the thought of you gagging on a banana. I kind of also had a mental image and got stuck in that groove, I'm afraid. In terms of the extras, is there anything that you've got now which maybe you didn't have, which you think back and go, God, I couldn't live without that now?
Yeah, I think for me, if we're talking in gadgets and gizmos, obviously I've upgraded my bike quite significantly, and you know, there are huge gains to be made on upgrading your bike. There's no doubt in that. But the one thing I don't think this will come as a surprise to you is the gadget and gizmo is the bike computer.
Yes.
Having done my rides on my phone, it's not the same. You get your bike computer and away you go. It really does change everything. You've got your warnings on there as well. So if you stop abruptly, it will ask you whether or not you're in an accident, etc.
Which computer do you have?
I've been thinking about getting a new one recently, but I've got a Garmin Edge 520.
Okay, yeah, not a bad one.
Yeah, it's not bad. I've seen that the Wahoo ones now are pretty good as well, and they're a lot easier to use as well, from what people tell me.
Funny you should mention that. I was discussing this the other day. Someone was asking, and I compare it. Garmin is like Android, and Wahoo is very much like Apple. So Garmin are renowned for being more technical and also quite glitchy when they launch new products. They seem to just launch their software half-baked. You do get patches and upgrades and firmware updates, a week or month later, but when it comes out, you're pulling your hair out if I had any. But Wahoo is very intuitive. It's very much like Apple. It works out the box. It connects to the phone. It's seamless. So if you're someone who's a bit more of a geek like I am and like to tinker with your tech, then Garmin. But if you just want it to work and don't want all that faff, then I would suggest Wahoo. When was it? Do you remember? Like, when was it that you realised you were kind of getting into cycling and were becoming quite addicted?
I would say it was earlier, but I really did notice it during lockdown. A lot of people were struggling mentally, physically. I went from doing 1,500 miles in a year to doing 4,000 miles in a year on the bike, which
wow,
that's and it was the one thing, because with work, as a 4-year-old at home, we sort of had to arrange our day, and I was cycling pretty much every day of the week at one point, and it was the only thing I was allowed to do apart from go to the shop to go outside. And it just gave me such a mental and physical release that it was I think that was the point really for me, and that spurred me on to do more things like coast to coast cycle. So yeah, it just came on from there really.
For me, I think through however terrible and challenging lockdown and COVID was when it started for many people, the one thing that I really loved was how quiet the roads were. I know that sounds really superficial, but to your point, I'm quite open about the fact that I suffer from mild anxiety. I'm on low-level medication for it. I'm quite open about it. But getting out there with the roads just as our playground was I'll never forget that. It was amazing.
The thing I did notice on the road, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, is lots of amateurs who went out and bought the bike and ended up taking the bikes back. There was a mass shortage in bikes and parts.
I remember.
What still is at the moment. But
a bike's not just for COVID, it's for life. There's a message there. People taking their bikes back one day and their lockdown puppies back the next, I'm sure. You talked about coast to coast moments ago. You mentioned it. I was going to say 2 questions in one because they're linked. A, where are your favorite places to ride, or where's the best places you have ridden? If I don't know how adventurous you've been fortunate enough to be. And the second question would be any sportives that you've done that you would recommend, or any ones that you've done that you would think, don't do it if you're just starting out because it's too hard.
Okay. So I tend to cycle local, and sometimes I just go where it takes me, which is great. I've not had any issues with that per se. I done a while ago, I did London to Brighton for a couple of years ago. I actually did it with two really fit lads. They one went to the gym a lot and one did running or something. And I forget what's the name of the hill there? The
Devil's Dyke.
No,
At the end, is it the last hill towards the end?
And we all had a pact that we were going to do that hill together, regardless whether or not. Anyway, the long story short, I stopped twice, but I managed to get all the way up it. And it was even worse because we started off quite late in the day, so it was the riders, everyone was walking, so I was having to zigzag throughout all these people to get to the top. That was really tough, and I was quite fit at the time, and I had to stop twice. So also I did on the coast to coast. It was a birthday present from my sister, and to go from, you know, round here where you're lucky if you can do 1,000 foot in 30 miles, to doing 5,000
You're in mid Hertfordshire, aren't you? You're kind of that mid Hertfordshire. It's quite flat. Yeah.
And then to go through Carlisle, and I don't know if you've ever been on the hill climbing out of there.
No.
I hadn't had enough energy, and I really wished actually I'd had a 32 cassette at the back or something even bigger, because at one point hadn't had enough energy, decided to go vegetarian as well for a while, and I stopped. I think it's about a 2-mile stretch. It is excruciating, and I went to go again. Actually, this is the second time I fell off my bike and didn't have the energy to push myself up so I ended up falling and having to have some energy and a bar and stuff.
You mentioned, which actually be really helpful for anyone watching this who's starting out and, you know, they're thinking about just what bike to get, let alone cassettes. Would you be able to share a little bit about the difference in cassettes and why you would get one size over the other?
Yeah, so again, this goes back to the point I made earlier, I think, about I got the stock cassette on the bike, and this explains probably why I ended up in that situation on the hill out of Carlisle. But I'd switched because I was getting frustrated with the stock bike that I didn't have enough power at the top end. So it didn't have a small enough cassette wheel at the highest point where it would drop. You know, I was pedaling faster than the wheels to get up to that speed, if that makes sense. So I switched it out, and I think I do remember I had a bigger derailleur on it as well. So I think that it was either a 32 or a 34, which is the number of teeth on the cassette. Obviously, the bigger and more you have on the back cassette, the easier it is to pedal, and the easier it makes climbing hills, for example. So what I would say on that is, if you are thinking, if you get to that situation where I was, and you're looking at doing a big ride or one certainly where there's massive climbs, you either need to do a lot of training beforehand to make sure you're going to be comfortable with it, or switch out that cassette, change it. A lot of cyclists I know have different cassettes for different types of rides. Yeah,
that's really helpful. So just to excuse me, just to clarify for those listening and watching, a 34 cassette is bigger and better for climbing. So if you're going to do lots of climbing or want it to be a bit smoother, get a 34 cassette. And to confirm what Pete mentioned, that's the number of teeth on the biggest cassette, makes it easier for you. And if you're more into sprinting and want to go on the flats or into time trialing, or TT as it's called, where you'll usually do between 18 to 30 miles relatively flat, then you might want to go for a smaller rear cassette. And I think they go from about 28 up to then up to 32, 34. I believe it might be even lower. So if anyone's at that stage of their cycling that's just thinking to mix it up a bit, that's some helpful information that you might want to consider having a play with. If you could go back and tell your younger self one lesson or one trick or one thing that would have improved your earlier cycling, what would you go back and tell yourself to do or try?
So from a bike's perspective, don't know why I didn't do this earlier, upgrade the wheels. Don't upgrade anything else, upgrade the wheels. Whilst you see some minor benefits on everything else, I think I was asking you about what wheels to get. I didn't get the extortionately expensive ones you suggested, but yeah, I went with some significantly lighter wheels, from aluminium wheels, and the difference was just, I can't put it into words.
Are they deep sectioned or normal kind of 22
deep,
mil?
no, the
Nice.
56 might
Nice.
be
I can
60.
see them, just the top of them there, just the top of them on the bike. What bike is that, by the way? What brand?
It is a Boardman. Yeah, I know.
Oh, that's
I know
the Boardman.
Yeah, I've still got it. Again, every time I go to upgrade it, I think, well, to change it, I think I'll upgrade it, and it's worked out well. But I think it's taken me best part of 4 years to upgrade the wheels, and if I'd have spoken to myself back 4 years ago, I would have said do that, because it drives you. The bike's better, and then it encourages you. You're getting faster times, you're getting faster PRs on Strava. The whole thing then just spurs you on to do bigger and faster rides.
Right. I know I said that was the last question, but something you just said prompted another one that popped into my mind. If you were to upgrade your bike, which brands would you particularly be looking at? What come to mind and why?
Yeah, it's so the one I'm probably very familiar. Well, there's a couple of names. There's your Specialized, Canyons. I'm still very much an amateur, so I wouldn't be. Although I did quite like my Campagnolo wheels. You do find that you like certain things, and you always buy. It's like at the moment I only buy the Continental GP 5000 tires because I've had the best enjoyment from them, and they've been very touch wood, haven't had a puncture on them. So I think I've only had one road bike. I would probably end up looking, reading, and doing the research first, and again, as I said earlier, talking to likes of yourself and friends who've had several bikes or have several bikes, and seeing what the best gains would be.
Pete, thank you very much for your time. I know it's difficult to speak when you're being held captive in an underground bunker somewhere. So I'm just delighted that your captors let you record this with me. So pass on my thanks to those guys too. But for everyone watching and listening, I hope you found it useful. Some great insights there and some knowledge about bikes and components and tires and everything, which we hope you found useful. Feel free to follow us on all the usual social channels. Check out the blog and subscribe at m2mcycling.com. Until next time, see you soon, and please ride safe. Bye.